Anyhow, let's go ahead and get started. I told he's got quite a few slides. I told him, you know, we kind of like to wrap things up, you know, no later than 11:30. Some of us, and I've got class shortly thereafter, so I need to move out smartly here. So with that in mind, everybody knows why we're here. And Chris said he would entertain questions during your presentation, and then we'll probably have time at the end for some additional questions. Any questions or comments from the committee or guests before we get started here?
I'm going to try and follow along with all of the acronyms and everything. The paper was, I thought, very well written, but it was just difficult for me to follow, not knowing the area in some of the things. So I'll do my best not to ask too idiotic questions. But
no worries. And I don't have too many acronyms in the presentation, but I'll make sure to state them out.
I loved the page with all of you spelling out all of your short-term jargon.
Oh, the 3 pages of acronyms?
Yes. That helped. I had that out the whole time.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, with that, go ahead and get started, Chris.
All right. Well, for those of you who I delivered the paper to, know the topic of my thesis was development of a general aviation integrated flight deck data link communication interface. Kind of a mouthful, but it's really the concepts we'll get into. So a quick overview, and let me know if you can't see anything, I can adjust it. Just briefly go over things that I presented for my proposal, such as the background information and now actually showing you what I did for my methodology versus what I was planning on doing. Pretty much the same thing. But then really getting into the results from the first study I did, which was a needs analysis, which led into developing an interactive wireframe model and doing a usability study based on that, and then discussion after that. So why did I even choose this topic? Well, for the FAA's next generation air traffic control system, they're trying to plan ahead for an increase in air traffic and increase the capacity. And by that, I mean the operational capacity, how many takeoffs and landings you can perform in an hour. So with that, there's the other aspect of, okay, we can physically fit the planes in, but how are we going to talk to them? So I was examining that from a general aviation perspective. So this purpose was using not only human factors, but also including a little bit of systems engineering, like looking at the big picture of where all the activities that I performed fit into the overall product lifecycle, fit in, to incorporating this into a general aviation aircraft. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but how do we communicate right now before all this other stuff comes in? Well, right now we have voice communications, where you select a frequency to talk to an air traffic controller from the pilot perspective, and you communicate. Now, the airlines and also military applications have ACARS, or Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, which, and a very generic term is, the concept is text messaging between air traffic control and the cockpit. For the airlines, you add in another element from air traffic control and the aircraft. There's also the actual airline's operations office. So the airline's able to send messages to the crew as well. Now, when things go wrong, there's set procedures for lost communications, where the air traffic controller will shine a series of lights in different colors and patterns, which the pilot can interpret and then operate the aircraft as the controller is commanding. So
before you go further, what if we had hypothetically a 777 taking off from Malaysia? Explain how that lost communication might occur. What ACARS or what data link might, what part that might play?
Well, depending on the equipment capabilities of that particular 777, I know on some other aircraft there's certain system-generated messages that can also be transmitted from the aircraft to the grounds. And by the grounds in this in this phrase, I mean the aircraft operations center or air traffic control, however the logic is set up. So if the link was active, in theory, if the system is set up to do so, it all depends on the configuration. These messages can also be sent down to give, also with how it's coded, if the GPS information is part of the header information or the airspeed or altitude or anything like that. So it all depends on how the information is coded and the configuration of it. But also for the communication aspect, air traffic control could go back and forth and have timestamps of when the last data link communication message was received or sent. And if there was the inability of the air traffic control to have the aircraft accept the message, like there was whenever there's a message sent from the ground or to the aircraft, the system will automatically send an acknowledgement saying, okay, cool, we got it, you don't need to try resending. So that would have been another indication of, oh, the aircraft is no longer submitting or accepting our messages. As far as data link communication.
I don't want to get off on that because that'll take forever. But
yeah, then we go.
I just thought Allison might be interested in that a little bit.
Yeah, and then we go into how the information is coded with all the airing type stuff, and that's kind of getting off the human factors route.
Sure.
But yeah.
Every time I get in an airplane since your proposal, I think about this stuff.
Oh, really?
And I think about, I hope they don't lose communication.
Well, that's actually kind of a cool thing with the loss of communication, kind of going into the segue for the next generation airspace system, is they're looking at data link communication as a viable option for the problem of there's too much aircraft, there's not enough communication time for aircraft to land. So there was actually a couple of solution alternatives. You could add additional frequencies for every single air traffic control station. You could go the European way, where instead of 25 kilohertz spacing, or the increments is 0.25, or sorry, 125. You could do 8 1/3, so potentially increasing the number of frequencies you have. However, that would still mean more air traffic controllers, equipment changes at the air traffic control towers, and the pilots will still need to change over their radios if they can't do that type of spacing, because otherwise they cannot select that particular frequency to communicate. So then they started experimenting with data link communication. And normally the product flow is you do in the military, then it flows to the airlines, and now to general aviation. And with ACARS, and I don't know if the military equivalent still calls it ACARS. They may call something different. But now it's time to, okay, what is the implications for general aviation, where you may have multiple person crews for air transport down to one pilot for general aviation? What's the workload and everything else? And I'll go into that in a little bit. Well, for loss communication, you're adding another system. So if voice goes out, you can revert to data link communication, or vice versa. So there's one extra step to go before you have to do the formal loss communication procedures with the lights. So my research questions were not of an experimental, like a classic experimental, what's the effect of this independent variable and this dependent variable. I was more getting the pilots, or more product design research questions. So first of all, what are their attitudes toward data link communication? Also, I may refer to data link communication as CPDLC, which specifies controller to pilot data link communication. And also, based on that, if they like it, what features are actually important to the pilots? And how should it even be integrated so that way it doesn't have any, from the display aspect, it doesn't have any undue impact to on the operation of other systems. especially if these two things are going to be co-located, as you saw from my thesis. And upon receiving a new message, how should they be notified? Should it be an auditory cue, visual cue, combination, so on and so forth? And where should the new message be located? Going to the emergency scenarios, lost communication wouldn't be so much of an emergency. But what if you're using data link communication and your engine goes out? How would you use data link communication? Or would the pilots want to revert to voice? And finally, should text-to-voice and voice-to-text operation or options be included in this interface? And throughout the needs analysis survey, these were addressed and also explored a little bit further in the usability study. So, from my proposal, I won't go too far into this. Some of the things that there's initial hesitation for data link communication in general aviation because of fears of increased workload, decreased situation awareness, extra head downtime. Well, what are they really talking about? Well, with the pilot's field of view, if the display for your messages is on another screen, that means that all your information for your altitude, airspeed, and all the things that you need to know for operating the aircraft are now in your secondary field of view. So what are the implications for how good is your secondary field of view at being able to pick up on changes in your airspeed if your number is just gradually decreasing versus your primary field of view? Which leads into the situation awareness. The first level of situation awareness is perception. Going back to the field of view, how are you able to perceive things differently from your primary and secondary field of view? And if you don't have the perception aspect of something, of a bad scenario developing, then the other levels don't even stand a chance of being there, of comprehending what's going on and projecting what the actions are going to be for later. So from there, how do we communicate? People communicate by exchanging meaningful messages and being able to interpret them. And it's not just verbally or through language. It's spoken, it's textual, it's body language, all these different means of interpreting what the sender is trying to convey. For text messaging, the processing ability of communication is different from listening to visual. Somebody shouting versus talking, yes, it equates to lowercase versus all caps and exclamation points and things like that. But as far as interpreting the data, text, let's say there's a new message that's displayed in text right above, say, a moving map display. How are you, you're too busy processing the message to possibly notice the moving map. And that's where this other workload concept is coming in, which led into the multiple channel resource theory, coined by Christopher Wiggins, where you're able to process things concurrently. So you can listen to me speak and also see and interpret my PowerPoint slides. But initially it was thought that if you, everything, no matter what, if it was tactile, auditory, visual, all kind of bottlenecked and came through one channel. Well, multiple resource theory says you can process all these different cues at the same time, but it'll still have a little bit of an impact. And if you're overwhelmed in one sense, it can have an impact on your other perception channels, which led into information processing, serial versus parallel. Obviously, if you have multiple visual cues, it's more likely that you'll be processing things one at a time versus processing things in parallel, auditory plus visual, at a very high level. And cognitive flexibility, it was, I thought of it as the concept of adaptability and learnability. Being able to see subtle cues in your environment that may have changed and being able to adapt. So as far as presenting pilots with a brand new interface that's integrated into something that they already know, how adaptable are they going to be at actually being able to use this? How good is their ability to learn the new system? And I'll go explore that in a little bit or later on. So from the methods, I started off with the needs analysis because I needed to know what their attitudes were toward data link communication and what sort of design features or interface features they really wanted to know. And times when they would want to use it, times that they didn't want to use it, so on and so forth. So I used that to get a baseline of functional requirements of the system shall, flash green and put a big smile face on the screen, things like that. But from there, I looked at that and went against the industry standards and guidelines and recommendations. So these are what the pilots want. This is what if we want to get this certified and actually make this a reality, these are the guidelines that we have to abide to, and then compare and see which ones are feasible, which ones are not. So I expanded that, and after developing a wireframe model that was interactive with an iPad, which I can show you if we have time after the presentation is all done, because I know everyone has time commitments. Why even test it at this point? Because, yeah, you have your just basic high-level functions. But the theory is if you're trying to develop something completely new that people may not have experience with, how reliable and how valid is the data that you're gathering when you're asking people about something that they don't have any experience with? So it's actually better to put something in front of them and say, do you like this? Or do you like option A or B? What do you like about this? What don't you like? And then you get more reliable and more valid data. So I chose the iPad because of wanting to simulate a touchscreen interface. And the screen size of the iPad is only half of an inch of diagonal size difference than that of an Aviation Integra, which is a common glass cockpit in small airplanes. So I was able to really see, okay, well, even just spacing on the screen, what are the implications for the font size, and how likely is it that something like this is even going to be readable from when you're sitting way back here in the pilot seat? So I went through several scenarios, and after each scenario, testing out different functions, I asked the participants to complete an after scenario questionnaire, or ASQ. And after all scenarios were completed, they completed the system usability scale. And I'll describe these later on in the presentation. So for the needs analysis, it was a web-based survey through other safety newsletters. I was able to reach a broader audience than I was originally anticipating. Overall, I had 250 or so responses, but not all of them were usable, so I ended up with 199. I couldn't hit 200. Just couldn't do it. As expected, overwhelmingly, the participants were male, and the range in age was actually pretty great, ranging from a low of 19 to a high of 81. But the mean and median were in the mid-40s, which was kind of expected with the fact that experience with data link communication in aircraft, it was actually more even than I was anticipating. I was expecting many more general aviation pilots without airline experience to respond to it, but with the assistance of the online newsletter that helped spread my survey, I was able to reach a lot of airline pilots, which also.
Was that Kurt Lewis?
Yep.
Good.
Yeah, he helped out a lot.
Is this representative of typical demographics of pilots? Like in terms of male versus female and age and stuff? Yeah.
What do you think, Chris?
Well, it depends on if it's just general aviation or airline pilots. Airline pilots, usually once you are young, you're getting your hours flight instructing. So the age is likely to be low if it was just general aviation without ACARS experience. some older pilots past retirement who do or will return back to general aviation, but they will have ACARS experience. So the middle of the road would be, so probably mid to late 20s to 60s is likely that those ages corresponded to current airline pilots that do have ACARS experience. And as far as what I was able to interpret. But if it was just general aviation, no, it would have been typically a much younger crowd with a couple of older pilots in there with likely no experience with daily communication.
What about the male versus female? Is that pretty typical?
From what I've seen, it is pretty typical. However, it all depends.
I think it's getting better now. The diversity is better. I think at the airline, we still struggle with at flight training. Maybe what do you think we are at FIT Aviation? Because just from working there all those years.
Oh, we're getting more females.
10% maybe female or less.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. In that neighborhood.
Yeah. So that part, so that age, and you'll see the trend carry on for my participants for the usability study as well. So I broke it for the purpose of providing you the information without regurgitating every single statistic from my paper. I provided a high level a glimpse into the data that I gathered. Going back to what are their attitudes toward it, how do they want to use it? I said, okay, I made the statement, or I asked when they would most likely, when would they be most comfortable using this technology? And overwhelmingly, it was in the en route phase of flight. So in the phase of flight that has the lowest workload associated with it. And also conversely, when would you be the least likely or least comfortable with using it? And descent and landing was the most people said descent and landing with takeoff and climb closely followed, which descent and landing is notorious for having the highest workload associated with it, and takeoff and climb is the second highest workload. So already we're kind of seeing a little bit of resistance toward, I really don't want to be using it during times when it may actually be the most beneficial. So as far as when or how should the pilot be notified of a new message? I said, what kind of auditory cue, or how would you like to be notified? And a nonverbal auditory cue, like a tone or a bell or a chime, was the highest, with closely followed by a visual alert on the display. And I offered their participants to provide comments on anything, and or in this case, there was an other option, and they said they want people want a combination. Now, with the visual display, this interprets to, since I'm integrating it into a flight deck, or the concept was to do it, I interpreted that plus the nonverbal plus the visual display to be on the multifunction display or the primary display. But then there were 5 people that said that they wanted some form of visual cue, but they were not specific of how the visual cue was to be presented. And then some people wanted a flashing light similar to cell phones, particularly I think Android phones may have that little flashing green or orange or red or something like that. So going back to where should the message be displayed, but also where should the interface for all the different options be displayed? Overwhelmingly, they said the multifunction display, or the display on the right-hand side for moving map, engine, your nearby airports, so on and so forth. With about a quarter of them saying they wanted it on the primary flight display. So upon that, I had a particular question for each thing saying, okay, well, if you said this display is the primary, how do you feel about the other display as a secondary? And for those that responded with the multifunction display, being the primary location, I said, how do you feel about the primary flight display, the display with your airspeed and your altitude and all that, as the secondary? And they said, no, we want it just on the MFD. And as opposed to how should the pilot be notified of a new message, should it be an alert to say go to someplace else and retrieve the new message, or should the new message just be displayed in its entirety? And it was about 81% either strongly agreed or agreed that they wanted the entire message displayed when it is received, which kind of makes sense. If there's already some sort of hesitation toward it, they want to make it as simple as possible and go straight to the point. They don't want to have to fiddle through menus just to say, oh, turn left. So attacking, or not so much attacking, but going for the situation awareness, which is one of the hotspots with this technology, is this party line effect, where pilots are using the voice communication of other airplanes to give themselves a better idea of what surrounding aircraft are doing. So Randy Flight 1, turn right heading 360, you have Dr. Betts Flight 2 at your 3 o'clock and 500 feet above you. Dr. Betts knows, okay, well at my 9 o'clock and a little bit below me, I'm going to have something else, or have another airplane going. And if there's traffic services available on the screen, you can say, oh, well, that's this blip right here. I know what this guy's doing. So, and that's something that you don't necessarily get right now with ACARS and the military applications of it as well. So I made the statement, I rely on listening to voice communications for other aircraft to improve my situational awareness, similar to what I just described. And 95% either strongly agreed or agreed. So I thought, okay, well, then how would they like to do this for data link communication? And it was a bell curve around neutral. And that kind of surprised me a little bit, because if 95% of people said that they rely on it for their situational awareness for voice, why doesn't it carry over to data? And I thought about this for a little bit, and it reminded me, just because something works in one application and in one method doesn't mean it's going to work in another. And one of the recurring comments that I got from the qualitative, just free text, what are your comments, was keep it simple, don't make it complex or too complicated to use. If we're displaying data link messages for other aircraft, how are you going to display those when a message is to you and also system generated messages? If they're displayed on the same spot, then it's easy to get confused of, oh, is that for me or somebody else? But if you associate it with a blip on a moving map display for traffic, then it becomes too cluttered, and you won't be able to see your airspace or maybe weather or anything else. So it started to make more and more sense the more I thought about it from, okay, keep it simple. But it was still kind of surprising they say situational awareness is an issue, and this is, case in point, one of the aspects that is how do you compensate for this? So emergencies. We've already seen the hesitation and kind of reluctance toward it, and this is where it was absolutely evident. Because when you encounter, let's say, an engine failure, there's the mantra, or aviate, navigate, and communicate. So you have the engine failure, you're getting control of the airplane, you're figuring out where you want to go and put the aircraft down, and then you notify air traffic control, hey, this is what I'm doing. So there's the aspect of the initial notification that an emergency is going on, but then communicating throughout the remainder of the emergency. So there's that other aspect. So I made the statement, I believe that it would be easier to make the initial notification of an emergency using data link communication. And about 66% either strongly disagreed or disagreed. So I took it one step further and said, what about throughout the entire emergency? And the number just grew bigger, 84% either strongly disagreed or disagreed.
So they want to be able to send the Mayday, and then they want attention from the air traffic controller, personal attention. They don't want a text message. They just want to get that Mayday out.
Exactly.
All right.
So and even at that, from normal procedure of changing your transponder code to 7700,
Mm-hmm.
then the air traffic controller already knows that there's an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
So is there value added to incorporating this for emergency scenarios?
Do you think there's I see potentially a psychological element here too, that goes beyond just the information content, via whether it's auditory or text, and that is, it's more comforting to hear another human voice
Very
than
true.
it would be to see something in text. You know, if you're really having problems,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd rather be talking to another human saying, you know, take it easy, okay, we're going to work this out, blah, 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 because you're not going to put that in a text.
No.
It's going to be bottom line stuff. And so all that information is missing from the text.
Good point.
I think that's a real important element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the actual human element to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
I'm just curious, did you ask whether you would mind that the pilots would mind insisting some of the emergency communication?
That I did not, because of the operation with the transponder. That kind of is in my mind, that's the system sending out the Mayday.
It's just that there are times where the 7700 is automatically put into as the transponder by
Mhm.
the system itself.
Okay.
And I was just wondering if that was something else.
Yeah. Okay. So, before the free comments, I asked what features do you want to have available to you in this sort of interface, and the ability to request and receive clearances was the highest, with route changes, PIREPs, weather information, and altitude heading and altimeter setting changes following suit. Now, there's a research group from the FAA, AJP 61, and they started listing 4 functionalities that a next generation daily communication system for general aviation should be able to do. Altimeter settings, altitude assignments, heading, route clearances. These are things that we're kind of carrying over. So it's kind of cool to see that at first I was worried that my data wouldn't be reliable or valid with the anticipated heavier weight of general aviation pilots, but yet they were requesting the same things that the FAA was already saying, okay, the system should do this, which was kind of cool. So to recap the needs analysis, the pilots were most comfortable with the concept during en route phase of flight at low workload conditions and least comfortable in high workload conditions. Some other questions I asked was about the text to voice and voice to text, and there was a desire to have voice to text abilities in both low and high workload conditions. As seen, emergencies, they did not want that at all. And from the free text responses, there were concerns, again, about the head down time and potential increase of workload. So coming from this, the initial functionality that came from the display preferences in the needs survey, it should be displayed on the multifunction display, so the display on the right. It should not impede the operation of the voice communication systems. I asked the question of, I believe that I would like to still be able to monitor the voice frequencies while still using daylink for my primary communication, and overwhelmingly it was yes. I don't even think there was much of an agree, it was strongly agree. And as far as integrating system messages versus daylink communication messages, they said they wanted it to be displayed to the pilot in the same place. So that was another thing that I had to work on integrating. And then also for the functionality, everything from the AJP 61 list described earlier. Which brings me to a couple challenges. Participants indicated that they did not want it, or they demonstrated adversity to using daily communication messages in a terminal environment. And by terminal, I mean takeoff and landing. But that's where it could be, where the benefits could be seen the most, because that's where the communications really start piling up. So how do you get people to use something where it has the most beneficial, where they originally indicated that they were hesitant to use it, which keeps going into the keep it simple and maybe just take baby steps toward.
By terminal environment, do you mean in flight? I mean, what about clearance delivery on the deck? Mm-hmm. Is that do you put that in terminal environment?
For the purpose of this slide, terminal environment referred to in-flight takeoff and landing, because it wasn't quite asked, or I didn't ask questions about using it on the grounds, because I was more focused on in-flight workload, because workload on the ground is considerably lower than when you're in the air. But also, going back to the discussion of the flow of technology, going from military to commercial aviation to general aviation. These are some sample displays. This is a Rockwell Collins communication data unit, and this is a navigation unit from Honeywell. And these show screens with physical keyboards, and they're being used for some form of functions. These are typical of aircraft that have more than one pilot. So how do you integrate the capabilities of something as complex as a standalone box and integrate it into an existing display where the workload is going to be considerably lower? Pardon me. But also, because the other aircraft are more complex, these have more features than what are needed for general aviation. So what are the specific functions and features that are needed, and then the rest, like how do you weed out the functions that you don't need? And that's through more product testing, more in-depth studies with the actual concept of operations from the FAA. Which leads me into, if we cannot get a standalone system into the cockpit, or let's say in other applications, the cockpit doesn't have a glass or electronic flight display, that would actually lend itself more toward having a standalone communication system. But also with just the lack of space in general aviation cockpits, it's very unlikely to be able to incorporate a separate physical keyboard, which lends itself to touchscreen. But data entry and just manipulation of touchscreen has its own set of concerns, namely turbulence or bad weather. You press the wrong button, and then the fear is that everything just kind of falls apart. So also with being able to convey, and with the use of color, the warnings, cautions, and advisories. If you have a daily communication failure, what colors are you going to be incorporating into the types of failures that you're going to encounter? But going into normal operations, if this daily communication system is co-located with another system, say a moving map display, you're going to have one set of controls for the moving map, the other set of controls for the data link. And the use of color to be able to link the functions, you have to be able to make sure that the colors are visible to the pilot in all sorts of lighting and weather conditions, but also make sure that they're different enough so that way there's not a false correlation of, I'm going to press this button for the moving map and I just did something with the data link communication interface. So I started looking at industry documents and started off with the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, or GAMA, and looking at the guidelines initially for how our cockpits or display is designed, but also looking at human factors standards like the RTCA DO256, which is particularly an air transport document or oriented document, but it still contains valuable information for general aviation. And also the military human factors design standard. Oh, and then also the FAA's human factors design standard too. So before I get into usability, or my usability study, what am I measuring for usability? There was a quote I read that said, trying to come up with one definition of usability is like nailing Jell-O to the wall. You really can't do it. There's a lot of elements that contribute to usability, but there's not one universal definition of it. And because I was looking at just a first iteration, low fidelity model of this, I wouldn't be looking at gaining performance metrics of the number of errors, types of errors, frequency, so on and so forth. Also, the actual performance of how long does it take to complete a task. It's just not there yet. However, Nielsen came up with 5 measures of usability that he said contributed to an overall measure. And learnability, going back to that cognitive flexibility concept, if you're more cognitively flexible, things will be easier for them to learn. But also, an extension of that is memorability or sustained learnability. You use something, you walk away, you come back to it, and how easy is it to just pick it up and use it after not using it for a while. Efficiency and errors are pretty much self-explanatory. Satisfaction, I thought was kind of a catch-all, because a product is satisfying if it's easy to learn, easy to remember how to use. There's not a lot of errors. It doesn't take too much time to do, and all this if it's usable, it's satisfying to use. For my study, I focused on the satisfaction and the perceived efficiency and the perceived learnability of this, because, like I said, it's not to the point of being able to gain formal metrics yet. So the 2 tools, apart from the physical iPad, as far as the scales I used, was the Actor Scenario Questionnaire, or ASQ, which asks 3 questions. I found the system easy to use. I'm happy with the amount of time it took. And then there was a 3rd question that said, I'm happy with the amount of support material that is available to me. But I didn't end up using that because this isn't the final product. There are no online help guides or user's manuals for everything. It could be seen that since I was doing this in person, that I could have been a resource, but that wasn't the goal. My interaction with the study was to be as minimal as possible. So I wasn't supposed to be a resource. So I took that question out. And that was on a 7-point Likert scale, 1 being strongly disagree, and 7 being strongly agree. And upon the conclusion of all the scenarios, they filled out the system usability scale, which is a 5-point scale. And it's 10 questions just summarizing everything. And again, it goes toward the perceived complexity, efficiency, and the ease of use of the users. And I use these scales because they were already previously developed. I didn't have to develop it myself, and so they already worried about, or the people who developed them already worried about making it reliable and valid and everything else. So that was less burden on me. So I was able to gain 20 pilots, or 20 participants. All of them were male, kind of following the trend from the needs analysis. There was a more concentrated age range, from a low of 19 to a high of 49. And apart from the 49-year-olds, and I believe it was a 46, the highest age was 27. So you can see everything was kind of concentrated lower, with the median of 23 years. And kind of going back to the discussion of, well, what are the demographics for age with the likelihood of having daily communication messages? With the fact that my participant pool was much younger, the fact that 85% of them did not have any data link communication interface or like ACARS experience was expected.
Because of the simplicity of general aviation, and it's not in that type of equipment.
Exactly. And those who are older, the 49-year-old, the 46, and the 27 or 28-year-old, they were people who went to the airlines and then came back. So they did have that extra experience.
Did you, and I know the numbers are real small there, but did you even eyeball differences in responses from those that said yes to data link experience compared to those 17 that said no? Did you look at any kind of comparison there?
Casually, but not formally.
That's what I mean, casually.
Yeah, casually. The responses were all so condensed that there really was no difference. And it was the same thing with the needs analysis. If those without experience said strongly agreed, those with experience would say agreed. Like they were so close that.
That's what I was wondering with the needs analysis, if you saw any differences across either age or, so I would think you would anticipate people who are older, who have less experience with newer technology maybe, would be more likely to disagree with their comfort level or being more uncomfortable with using something.
And
did you see any of that?
I was expecting, that was one of the things one of my expectations going into it. However, in this scenario, the older you are, the more experience with the more complex equipment that you're likely to have.
Gotcha.
So it was one of those things of, with age, you're a lot like outside of aviation, just for like smartphones or laptops and things like that. There might be more resistance, but this is with age and experience in aviation. That's like you almost become dependent, or not so much dependent, but
with like the commercial airlines.
An
Exactly.
interesting thing that might be of interest to you being kind of a non-aviation person is, I don't know if my colleagues would necessarily agree, but within the aviation community, we're really dealing with a really homogeneous group. I mean, there is so much alike, both in terms of personality and mindset and skill levels and so on. You don't see the wide variety of differences that you would see if you're doing like a psychology experiment or something like that. At least that's my experience. So the fact that you're not finding a lot of differences doesn't necessarily surprise me. And it seems to go beyond gender, age. It seems those
like opinions and things.
they seem not to be determined. They seem not to be determined by some of those other factors that we see in other studies outside of aviation. That's unofficial observation on my part. I mean, I don't know if there's studies that show that.
Interesting.
It is. I think it is kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, an overview of the scenarios and the functions. And kind of, I know it's been a while since we looked at the core functionality from the AJP 61 and the desired functions. But these were modeled after, or the functions that I decided to develop and test for the usability study were those contained in the two lists, primarily the FAA's core functionality list. So I tried to do this as much as a flow of a flight as possible. I wasn't able to completely succeed because some functions are specific to visual flight operations versus some are specific to instrument flight operations. So I tried to go develop much of a flow as possible. I wasn't able to develop a complete takeoff to landing type of a flow between all the scenarios. So I started off with the system startup and having the system notify the pilot of whether or not they were able to use data link communication messages, and also accessing a historical message list. So, and the reason why I even developed or thought of the historical messages is what happens in that scenario when you get multiple messages at the same time, such as the air traffic controller, instead of saying turn left and climb, they just send turn left, so they have to quickly send another climb message. So if you acknowledge by the time you're ready to acknowledge, the second message could have come through and you're still waiting to acknowledge the first one. So you can see all the messages in a list, and you can pick and choose which one you want to acknowledge. And there also developed redundancy in accessing that as well, as you have seen from my flow diagrams of how you can go from a start to an end of completing each and every one of these tasks. So after startup, the concept was you're sitting on the ramp, your engine's running, you want to get your IFR clearance and your taxi clearance through data link communication. For the transfer of communication, I did accepting an ATC handoff. So the example was you're flying from Melbourne to Ormond Beach, which for an instrument flight is easy to accomplish. You just fly Melbourne in one airway, and Ormond Beach is right there. So it's a very simple concept. And after you turn north from Melbourne, you will get handed off to Orlando as air traffic control. So I was able to just keep going along this path of trying to get as much of a realistic flight scenario sequence as possible. So after that, I told pilots to submit a pilot report, or a PIREP, for heavy rain and moderate to severe turbulence. And even though it was said that they didn't want to notify or use data link communication in emergency scenarios, I still wanted to test it anyways, because I saw integration at two levels. And from the screenshots that I included in my thesis, there was the integration of the home screen and having a separate self-contained interface, but then making it more transparent for the other functions and features. So integrating it when you're creating your flight plan and you click on an airport or a waypoint, what are some different options for data link communication messages that you can incorporate into that to make it more seamless? And less, hey, you have to do everything through this one little thing. Then I had a scenario 5 for requesting an altitude and heading change. And then kind of backtracking, for VFR specific, I said I had a scenario for opening a flight plan and requesting flight following. Flight following for visual pilots gives, you don't have to follow the navigation, or you're not under the direct control of an air traffic controller, but they're keeping an eye out for you for traffic, weather, and things like that. So it's like flying in, as far as the operations, it's just like flying through instrument conditions, but in good weather. And it's a little bit more relaxed. But then also requesting acknowledging a specific instrument approach into an airport. And I was able to do that using two different methods as well. One, following the concept of, well, you integrate it from a standalone interface, but then making it more seamless. So with the historical messages and the system startup, the mean score for the ease of use was 6.4, with the median of 6.5, and a pretty low standard deviation of 0.68. And with the amount of time, or the perceived efficiency of it, the mean was 6.7 with the median of 7. So the concept of just the basics of having a historical messages list and how the pilot was notified of whether they can or cannot use data and communication messages was well received. Which was good, because if that was bad, then that would have explained the bad scores for everything to follow. So for the scenario...
One quick question, sorry.
Yes, sir.
And I can't remember now, it's been a while since I've looked at your scale here and so on. Were all the questions worded in the same direction? In other words, did you have to reverse code any of your questions? For the after scenario questionnaire, no. For the system usability scale, yes. I found this system unnecessarily complex, where the lower score is better. So you had to reverse code those to come up with your mean? You know what I'm talking about?
I probably do, but not in the way.
In other words, second question.
Yeah.
Overall, I am dissatisfied with the amount of time. In other words,
Oh no, everything was stated in the positive.
but on the other one, you had questions that were,
Yeah.
okay, so by reverse coding, you have to reverse the scores. You can't score everything I guess it's 1 to 5?
For this, it's 1 to 7, but in the other one, it's 1 to 5.
1 to 5.
Yes.
So I think it's important, if you didn't do what I'm saying, then you'll have to redo it, because it won't, the scales don't match up. Do you know what I'm talking about? In other words, some of the questions are in a different direction, so you can't score them all 1 to 5. In other words, if it's if the question's in reversed, then 1 is really a 5 and a 5 is really a 1.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
If you didn't do that on that second question there, then your means are not going to be accurate. So that's why that's an important question that I'm asking you, because if you didn't do what I said, you're going to have to redo that, because it won't be.
Because if it's written as I am not satisfied and they put strongly disagree, that would actually be a 5 if it was I'm satisfied instead of a 1.
Okay, I
Does
see
that
what
make,
you're.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
I think when I get to the system usability scale where those things were, I think I understand what you're saying.
We'll look at it when we
we'll,
get to that.
We'll look at that.
Okay.
So for requesting clearances, with the ease of use, it was scored again really high with a 6.25 out of 7, with the median being 7. The standard deviation was a little bit higher, which also explains the decrease in the mean.
Just one quick question. How many more slides do you have? And I don't want to rush it, but I want to make sure we have time to finish everything up by 11:30.
There's 5 more of these, 4 slides for the system usability scale, and then the wrap up.
Okay, good. So you're close.
I
so you should be done
I trimmed
in
a
the
lot.
next 10 minutes or so.
I trimmed that.
Can I ask one question just to clarify for the 20 people that did this? They also did the survey or the needs analysis? Or
That I'm unsure of.
you don't know. Okay.
Yeah. The only way I was able to, what was visible to me because I used Question Pro.
Oh, so you didn't
Yeah.
know if they didn't put anything.
No, it was complete anonymity. The only thing I have was IP addresses.
Okay.
So,
Just
yeah. Okay, so with the perceived efficiency, the mean was 6.55 out of 7, so still we're agreeing that everything was efficient and easy to use.
You mentioned something about the first question. You said that it was a little bit lower. Say something.
I just noticed the standard deviation was a little bit higher on this one, which there were a couple of people who at first they didn't understand exactly where to go. And like I said, and I'll explain this in the wrap-up, where when you're doing things in person, it's from the researcher perspective, it's so hard not to just jump in and say, oh, no, this is how you do it. Isn't it so simple? So I was waiting for them to really get completely lost and stop.
Can you go back to scenario 1 real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I see the same issue here with the second question, your median. Go to scenario 2.
Yeah.
How can you have a median of 7?
That's what I was trying to figure out, because
if the scale is 1 to 7, that doesn't make sense to me. The median's a middle score. You can't have a middle score of 7. That's an endpoint. Something's not right.
If you have 15 scores and 8 of them are 7s, and the other 7 are lower. Yeah, actually, you can't have a median of 7.
And that's what happened.
Okay, did you look at that to make sure that was the case with the data?
Yeah. There were a lot of people that, you'll see this trend for a lot of them.
So the median is 7, so that means there's only just a few that scored really low to increase the standard deviation.
Exactly. So going back to when if their participants were having trouble at all, most of the time it was not remembering what exactly they were supposed to do first or what the values were. So lesson learned that I'll also recap on was to have the instructions separate, so that way the instructions don't go away and they're trying to remember what they're supposed to do instead of focusing on the interface. So ATC handoffs and PyReps. The ATC handoff scenario was so simple because you entered, you pressed a button, and you hit confirm, and then that was it. So I combined scenario 3 for including the pilot reports. And with the ease of use, it was 6.5 with a little bit of standard deviation regarding specifically the pilot report aspect. Again, it was one of those things, they forgot what parameters they were supposed to do, so there was a little bit of, they were expressing more frustration with remembering what they're supposed to do than actually looking at the interface. However, they said that the amount of time it took, they scored it very, very high. Once they actually, to the point like writing things down and saying, okay, cool, this is what you're supposed to do. So it was more of a procedural thing, which actually, just to give you a little bit of a demo, because we still got some time.
Explain that again to you about the meeting. I'm blank on that.
Okay, let's say that there were 20 people in the study.
Yeah.
Let's say that 12 of them all did it as a set.
Yeah.
The median is going to be a 7 because what you do for median is you pick the middle number. So and so if you have let's say you have 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. The middle number is going to be a 7.
Okay.
That's the median. And then the mean is the average.
Okay.
So then you add them all up and you...
So you'd have to have a lot of 7s.
Yeah,
in order for that to happen.
Yes.
And actually, what in reality, it was more like this, like a 6, a 6,
Oh,
and then
a lot of 7s. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I got you.
Okay. So the actual scenario that I had people do was heavy rain and moderate to severe turbulence. And like I said, I can demonstrate this on the iPad as well, but I want to, in case we didn't have time, I still wanted to show you an example of what I did. So from the actual kind of home screen, so to speak, you have an icon with a label underneath it for pilot report. And it was organized by the category, the type of weather, and then the severity. And it was all per the Aviation Weather Services handbook and the actual format of a pilot report. So you select the sky condition for rain, heavy rain, and if that's the only thing that the pilot needed to report, it would have been complete. In this case, we're not reporting anything else, or add weather. Oops.
But this would all be touched.
Yeah, and this is what I was able to do. Yeah. And then because you hit add weather, it says, okay, you already reported something in the sky condition category. And I put complete here again, because what if they hit add weather in error and they really want to complete it? Oh, cool, it's right there always. So for the turbulence, moderate to severe, and we're done reporting, complete it, and then redundancy just in case it was pressed in error, confirm it. And then they did the after scenario questionnaire for that. So that was the type of thing I was able to simulate with that. Now, one of the things that they liked over, they actually said, well, what about everything else I have to report? Normally for when you file a pilot report, you contact the flight service station and you say, hi, I'm this type of airplane with this tail number, this is my location, this is my altitude, and all that is extra time just to get to heavy rain and moderate to severe turbulence. So the concept for this was, for the messages, it will extract all that data from the air data computer and have that almost like a header for the message. So only what the pilot needs to report is what they actually need to do, and then it packages it off and sends it.
That's a wonderful improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Because general aviation pilots won't change frequencies and report on bad weather, but if they have it, automated,
mm-hmm.
They're more likely to do that. And it's hard to reach those guys now. They're contracted out to Lockheed Martin, at the flight service. And you might be talking to a guy in Seattle, and you're flying over Florida. The way the system works.
Exactly.
So it's great. It's a great improvement. And I someone should have thought of that earlier. That's a good one. Yes.
And one additional concept for this with the whole digital ATIS and the weather information going back and forth is again, future concepts of automatically saying, okay, I want to have all pilot reports within 25 or 30 nautical mile radius of my location. So it can scan the ground station, so when you come within that parameters, it'll say, oh, hey, that this time, this is the weather condition that's reported.
See, those
it would be kind of cool to do, but it's, again,
those are concepts that are probably, we should look at it, weather technology in the cockpit for our Center of Excellence, because those are great concepts that are value added, that people would strongly agree to, and give them information that they don't have otherwise. So very, very good.
Yeah. And currently it's a what if, but a future extension of, okay, we sent pilot report information, but what about receiving it? So that would just be one aspect of it.
You showed or confirmed very, but you didn't actually show what you were saying.
And that's one of the other things that I'll get to my thing. Yeah.
Because a lot of times you get started doing something, and then something happens, and you have to come back to it. You may not remember what you already did. And that, I mean, that's the first, I was just looking at what you did, that's the first thing I thought.
Yep.
Yeah, I know sometimes I've sent email, and in some systems it will say message sent, and sometimes that message will stay there, but sometimes then it goes off after so many seconds. So if you get distracted and you come back, and it's not there, it's kind of like, well, did I? Sometimes I go to the sent folder and see if it actually was sent, if I forgot or whatever.
And then that goes back to the memorability aspect of the usability. So the big one that I was expecting the lowest scores for were diversions and emergencies. I gave them the scenario that you experience an engine failure, you have to turn back or you have to make an emergency landing. And the concept was that it would be integrated into the nearest airport page, where part of the navigate aspect of Aviate, Navigate, Communicate. If you're flying on autopilot and you're just going to be changing what you put in your flight plan, okay, you're going to hit direct to Melbourne. And when you do that, because of the special mode that the system is going in, that will send the message to ATC saying, hey, I'm declaring emergency and this is where I'm heading. You're already monitoring the voice frequencies, so the rest of it can be done via voice as needed. But just in the navigation aspects of working your way through an emergency, the communication part of it is already taken care of. So all that, the reluctance of using CPDLC or the daily communication in high workloads and emergencies, they said that it was very easy to use, and they were very happy with the efficiency of it because of how transparent the communication aspect of it actually was. And there was a trend with this, and also another scenario I'll get into about, they started having comments about things that were not specific to the communication aspect of the scenario, and on things that they were focusing on the wrong part of the interface design than what I was intending them to focus on. So I'll dive into that.
We're going to speed up a little bit, Chris.
Okay.
I want to make sure we have time for the committee to meet too.
Okay. For heading and altitude changes, there was a digital number pad. It was, just plug in the numbers. And again, the ease of use was 6.8 with the high median, so there are a bunch of people that strongly agreed that it was easy to use. The amount of time, again, the mean score was 6.95. So yeah, and lower standard deviations too. So apparently I did well on that one. With opening a flight plan and requesting flight following, again, the really high scores with lower standard deviations for the ease of use, 6.55 for the ease of use, and 6.85 for the amount of time. For the instrument approaches, like I said, there was a little bit of trend where they were focusing on the wrong part of it, and they rated it a lower mean score, again with this higher standard deviation. So a lot of people strongly agreed, but there were still those couple people that brought the mean down for the ease of use. But they still thought that it was still very quick to execute everything. Now overall, for the system usability scale, the scale changed from 1 to 5 instead of 1 to 7 for the different tool. So overall, they were saying that they would like to use it frequently. They thought it was definitely easy to use, which, going back to the other scale, out of 7, the lowest mean score was 6.25 or thereabouts. And it kind of correlates to, out of 5, it was a 4.5 for here. So the two were pretty, there was a pretty good correlation between them. As far as the level of integration, the 4.3 out of 5. So we're still in, not so much in the strongly agree, but still agreeing that it was well integrated. And I think this is where you're talking about earlier, where the lower score is better. They thought that they would need the help of a support person and need to learn a lot of things before getting going. They moderately disagreed with it. So this is where, like you were saying, for representing the data, I'd have to flip it.
If you're going to, when we think about that, you'd only have to flip it if you were taking an overall mean, right?
Yeah.
If you're just looking at
this is
that question
just
by
for
itself,
the question. Yeah, exactly.
then it doesn't. I guess it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I think that in the paper, you might want to separate it into 2 tables potentially then. Because that's what I had highlighted. So in your table here, they're kind of mixed in.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have 4.35, and then just at a quick glance, this says 1.5 or whatever. I quickly was like, wait, why is that so low?
Yeah.
But it's really not. It's high.
Yeah.
Because of the way. So if you don't want to do the reverse scores, you might want to separate the tables into those type of questions, like the unnecessary questions in ID support versus the I'm satisfied or something to make it clear for the reader that for these questions lower is better, for these questions higher is better.
Okay.
If you don't want to flip them.
Okay. And also that could have worked when I was actually administering, because the order that they appear in the thesis is the order that they were actually.
So they might have.
Yeah. So
did you report? I can't remember. Did you report an overall mean for this questionnaire across all questions or not?
I did, and I took it out because it wasn't. Yeah.
Was that one of the modified? Because here is page 137 on the.
With the percentages.
The new one. Sorry.
No, the new one. I tried to compare the SUS scale to the ASQ scale.
So you took the overall means out for the. Oh wait, that's ASQ overall.
Well, what I did for the overall mean was the mean of the means for the first question. So the 6.6, the mean of 6.5, 6.8, 6.65, so on and so forth. I tried doing that. But I think I did end up taking that table out, because when I compared it, I tried to make everything identical, or not identical, but easier to compare, and I did it incorrectly by converting it to percentages, which leads to false conclusions of that, because 40% versus 80%, 80% is twice whatever the measure, but in this case, 2 and 4 out of 5, there's 4 isn't twice as good as 2 or vice versa. So I did correct that, and I took it out for the revised draft.
But you didn't report overall mean for your SUS data across all questions, did you? No. Okay. If you did, then you'd have to reverse code those questions.
Gotcha. Yeah. For going back to the initial learnability, most people would learn the system very quickly. Moderately agree with the median of moderately agree. The confidence in using it was very high. Well, not very high, but still moderately agree. And then going back to the other reverse coding, or the flip side where lower is better. The cumbersome to use, complex to use, and as far as inconsistency, they were all right in between strongly disagree and disagree. So again, because of how many people said strongly disagree, this thing rocks. That's, yeah, for lack of a better phrase.
One suggestion, going with what Dr. Beth said, is you can take those questions and put them in a separate table or something like that, but then what you did is you included them in the order in which they didn't. So what you can do, another way of doing it would be to star the ones that are like that and have a footnote down there saying these were, please note, these are reverse whatever, you know what I'm saying? That way you don't have to even do another table, you just have to put the footnote. That might be better. That way you keep the integrity of your questionnaire the same. You're not moving questions around.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just another way of doing it.
Okay, cool. So going back, or before I go into the future development, responses from the usability study, going back to what Randy was saying, there was an overwhelming response to, I want to review what I'm saying. Well, so when you press confirm, have a review section come up of everything that you're saying and then hit OK. One of the things with the heading and altitude scenario, where it started off with the heading, so they put in 3, 4, 5 as per the scenario, but then when they switched to altitude, the heading information disappeared. Where the concept was that, okay, it's still stored, it's all good to go, but during that scenario, I had everyone trying to go back and re-enter the heading information because it disappeared, so they assumed that the system it went into La La Land. So after I would still have people go through it a couple of times, and when they obviously hit that point of, okay, what am I doing wrong? Then that's when I stepped in and said, oh, it's still okay, you can continue on. And before I go into the other...
You don't have a whole lot of time, so you're really going to have to kind of speed things up.
Okay. Possible other things with this is the fact that I tested positive scenarios where everything worked out okay on the first try, and it was more sending information instead of receiving. So it could be seen that, this study was biased because I only did the good scenarios. But at the same time, this is the baseline. If you can't get things right when everything is working in an ideal world, then everything else is going to be flawed. And you got to go back to the drawing board at the beginning. So for the first attempt, you got to establish some form of baseline. We don't have time for the automated reporting, but it was an extension of the check-in where it was integrated into the flight plan, where if you cross over a fix or an airport or something, it would automatically shoot a message to air traffic control saying, hey, I'm here. Where otherwise, currently, the pilot has to remember, oh, hey, I have to report when over this point in space. Voice-to-text capabilities, I did not do. I did text-to-voice for when the new message appeared. A synthetic voice read the message to the pilot. And that kind of went back to the initial hesitation of, and I'm not so sure about this data link communication thing. I want voice-to-text and text-to-voice. So it's still them showing the desire to still do things or keep things as close to the way they are as possible. So for future usability testing, just as this design grows and gets more fidelity and actually programming logic instead of canned scenarios, then that's when we start going into getting metrics for the number of errors, severity, and actual performance testing for the efficiency. And also, this was integrated with current technology. But what about other next-gen navigation technologies, such as trajectory-based operations in the air and on the ground, and other navigation things? What are those display requirements as opposed to what display requirements would be for a data link communication interface? And I believe the FAA is interested in this as well and doing research grants on this. Not that not that I would know or anything, but also the concept of handicapped pilot possibilities. There's stories of people that are handicapped from the waist down or missing limbs that are able to fly a specific airplane because of how that airplane's configured, specifically toward them, and there's other limitations. Well, with data link communication, what about the possibilities for deaf and mute pilots for data link only, limitations on their licenses? That's a little bit farther out there, but it's still a very viable what if. And we were talked about throughout it in the situation awareness and the workload. And flipping gears a little bit for the system aspect of it. If you include data link communication, you have to adapt your cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, to handle the data link messages. So for the receiving and transmitting of messages, how are you, in looking at the historical messages, should the historical messages just be reading the data from the cockpit voice recorder, and all messages in and out go through the cockpit voice recorder and then in and out? So it's just something to think about as far as feasibility of actually getting this going. And we already talked about if you lost your data link, you would just switch to voice, or if you lost your voice, switch to data link. And as far as diagnosing errors, what errors are needed to be displayed to the pilot, and how would the pilot be able to mitigate for those if it was absolutely imperative to use data link communication? So in conclusion, from the needs analysis, there was some hesitation, but yet from the usability study showed that the system was easy to use. Now, it could be that throughout, as a standalone interface, it works, but when integrating it into actual operation, it may start seeing some struggle once you actually get it into its operational environment. But also, looking at this from a due process of getting user requirements and developing against the industry standards, you'll get something that is very pleasurable to use. So it all served as a validation activity of the process, but also if you design to the standards, you'll have a usable product. And finally, it was kind of a first evaluation exercise of using a tool for something that it was never meant to do, and the lessons learned and how viable of a solution or of a tool is PowerPoint at doing this. I learned that canned messages, such as the brief demonstration where I had each function laid out, it was fine. However, when most of what I was doing was trying to get it as a standalone interface, perform this task, perform this task. It was a complete fire it up and start messing with the functions. There's no traceability for the buttons. You have to press and test every single one. So for a development aspect, do it right the first time, otherwise you're going to pay for it later. Because there's no way of just opening a file saying, oh, cool, this is wrong. And there's no debugging at all. And that's that.
Okay, very good. Get the lights maybe?
Yeah.
Get the lights. Just a couple comments, and I'm going to open it up to the committee. Mm-hmm. First of all, Chris, I would put your presentation probably in the top 3 of any presentation I've heard from the College of Aero in the last 13 years. That was an excellent presentation.
Wow.
You didn't read your slides. You talked about it. It was a real professional presentation, and I don't always see that from students. I mean, because they're still learning and so on. Mm-hmm. But you not only did you conduct your study well, but you presented it well. Your challenge. He's going to be presenting at Embry-Riddle at a student conference. Your challenge is to be able to go from an hour and a half down to 15 minutes. I don't know how you're going to do that. But you're gonna. I have some ideas. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. So that was number 1. Number 2, I think we need to, and we talked about that. We need to be thinking about publication on this because it's highly publishable. And number 3, I think we need to get this off to Dan Hirschler or somebody to let them know the kind of research that we're doing or have done that might whet his appetite to continue some funding.
We can forward it to the Center of Excellence people. Well, let me think about that. I got to think about the right office. This is probably a Atlantic City FA Tech Center type of, Michael Boone kind of thing.
And there's
Yeah, maybe so, but it would be nice for them to get a better idea of the kind of research quality that we're doing, because this was an excellent study.
You presented when they were here. On our first Pegasus meeting, you presented this.
Right.
as you saw my traceability.
Indeed. Great work, yeah. Okay, good idea.
And this,
Yeah.
there's also a
I
lot
don't
of,
know how we package it, but it just seems like it's something you want to get out
Yep.
in some way.
well, there's also, if there's other master's students looking for future research, you saw all my crazy flow diagrams in there at the beginning when I was introducing each function. And then in the appendices, I had task analyses for different phases of flight, where to give you guys an idea of the level of workload and situational awareness, these are all the tasks that are going on for Aviate, Navigate, Communicate. And the idea was to take the flow diagrams for each function and integrate that into the hierarchical task analyses and say, wow, this is really what's going on for what's the allocation for, just your hands for operating the controls plus that, plus this, everything else. So there's a lot of springboarding for other master's research too.
What you did was even close to a dissertation level. I mean,
I was thinking the same thing.
I was too.
Yeah.
you were
And I didn't know, and that's one of my questions was going to be for you guys, is like this a typical thesis, because
Well,
We do good work. We do good work, though.
Yeah.
We do good work.
just to give you an idea,
We should say yes, right?
when I
Well, if it's over to me now, I'm going to do it real quick. I've seen Chris since he was a puppy, since he was a freshman. Grow, and this is the quality of, our loss is Rockwell Collins and the industry's game. Randy, and I could see him.
Actually, I already have ideas and earn one.
Well, let's you and I talk about funding. Maybe we have the next Bill Greenleaf standing right here.
Except for we're going to have to cut out a lot of stuff about the studies. The people I work with don't care about the studies; they want to see the product.
Well, I understand. But congratulations, outstanding work.
Thank you. Yeah, to give you an idea, when I rehearsed this weekend, it was at 3 hours, 2.5 or so. So this is like the short version.
Any
I
other?
think you did fantastic.
Any other
For the outside person, the writing was very clear, and explain things pretty well. For not knowing there was still something I figured you guys would catch it if it's incorrect. But I kept thinking the same thing. This was a huge project, a huge undertaking. You did really well with it. You presented it very well.
Thank you.
So I think
Thanks.
you should be proud.
From somebody who's involved in the industry, the only thing that I would have liked to have seen is an autopilot in a scenario to see what they thought about. And the reason I say that is because that's who pays the bills. It may be the younger pilots who are doing a lot of the flying, but they're not the ones who fly the aircraft. They're not the ones who could actually do something like this. It's the older pilots who are going to actually have to evaluate it and decide that this is something that we want to have. This is something that we can use, and that's just the way it is. So in everything that we do at Rockwell, we're not necessarily worried about a 20-something-year-old. We're worried more about the 50, 60-year-old, because that's who's actually making decisions. And I know that you guys got to talk and so slip out back.
Just hang out in the lobby out there somewhere, and we'll come get you in a few minutes.
Yeah, and I would recommend, I just found out Rosemary Lane told me they're going to be down a formatting person, an assistant,
Better do it soon.
on
Yeah.
the 8th, so go before then. Otherwise, she said you'll be waiting out the morning.
Well, congratulations. That was no surprise. You passed. And that's the good news. The bad news is I think we have to redo your signature page or something.
Well, you need a scrub at the graduate program office.
Can I have the pen back, please?
Yeah.
No, the pen.
Oh, the pen. Beg your pardon. I'll show you. These are all single space. It's all formatted. It's nothing serious.
Oh, I thought it was single space.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll show you. Let me show you what I'm talking about, and then it's just
So what you'll have to do is make whatever changes your signature page, and then you'll have to hunt Dr. Betts down and grab her sometime. Getting us will be easy because we're here.
Yeah.
I think that from what I heard, the only change was that one table having a footnote where you have a asterisk or something like that. I didn't. The formatting stuff, but I mean nothing significant that you couldn't take care of, in short order. So again, great job, committee. Do you have anything? Anybody want to add anything before you're dismissed?
I would just say the one thing. So I was just telling them, Rosemary Lane at the grad program's office, that they're going to be down a formatter starting on the 8th, so next week. So go before then. She said otherwise, because I have some doctoral students graduating, she said otherwise the lines can be out the door. So if you can get in before the 8th, you'll really get in more quickly. And they'll take your computer, they'll sit down and do everything for you.
Okay.
And walk you through everything.
And you and I will need to get together in short order to talk about the Embry-Riddle presentation. So
I can send you the slides for that.
I'm sorry?
I'll send you the draft slides if you want to look over them.
Yeah, I have some ideas in terms of how I want it presented that I think you got a chance at first place on this. I really do.
Those is like a student
To
competition.
have prizes, yeah. Cool. Every year that and I'll toot our horn, every year that every year that FIT has competed in this, we've usually won first place.
Awesome.
This is against UCF, against other schools in Florida where we do real well in this kind of student presentation. So I think we're a possible winner there. But even if not, it's a good experience for you. So
It could be a warm up for HFES if that works out.
Yeah, Human Factors Society, where he's going to be presenting there too, I hope. So anyhow, thank you for coming. I've got to get ready for my class.